In 1770, a British explorer stood on a beach and claimed an entire massive continent for a king who had literally never seen it. His legal justification? A law that only worked if nobody was already living there. But here's the stunning reality. There were already people living there. Not just a few, but populations with 65,000 years of continuous human history. What happened next created one of the strangest, cruelest, and absolutely most bizarre chapters in human history. Welcome to This Explainer.
Okay, let's dive into this. How exactly did a stolen coastline, a boat full of criminals, a literal military war on birds, and nuclear surviving ants shape a continent? Today, we're going to flip your understanding of this famous landmass completely upside down. It's the incredible story of Australia, and I promise you, almost none of it is exactly what you think. The scale of time we're dealing with here is just staggering. 65,000 years ago, while most of the world hadn't even begun painting on cave walls, a group of humans did something almost impossible for the era. They built rafts, crossed open ocean they couldn't even see the end of, and landed on a continent nobody else knew existed. No maps, no compasses, just open water and an incredible guess. These were the ancestors of Aboriginal Australians, and what they built afterward is still being radically underestimated today.
Because they didn't just survive the harshest, driest, inhabited continent on Earth, they mapped it. They created songlines. These were epic oral maps that used story and song to record water sources, hunting grounds, and safe paths across thousands of kilometers of punishing desert. A song wasn't just music or entertainment. It was an ingenious, orally transmitted GPS system, faithfully passed down for 600 centuries. Can you even imagine retaining that kind of geographic data purely through a song?
And they didn't stop at mapping. They also practiced firestick farming, something European scientists didn't even believe was possible until the 1970s. They used fire deliberately, in careful patterns, to manage the entire landscape. These small, controlled burns cleared out undergrowth, encouraged new plant growth, and actually prevented the kind of catastrophic wildfires the continent is infamous for today. The crucial takeaway here? They were engineering an entire ecosystem long before traditional agriculture existed almost anywhere else on Earth.
For 65,000 years, that was Australia. Then, in 1770, a ship showed up and everything changed. Captain James Cook sailed up the eastern coast and claimed it all for Britain under a monstrous legal concept, terra nullius. It's Latin for nobody's land. The idea was simple but devastating. If the land wasn't being farmed the way Europeans farmed, it counted as empty. It completely didn't matter that hundreds of distinct Aboriginal nations, each with their own language, law, and territory, had been living there for longer than agriculture had existed anywhere. With this one lie, on a piece of paper back in London, the whole continent was erased and declared blank.
So why did Britain need a blank continent so badly in the first place? Well, their prisons were overflowing and they had just lost their favorite dumping ground, the American colonies, after that whole revolution business. This desperate need for a new dumping ground led directly to the First Fleet of 1788. 11 ships sailed into what is now Sydney Harbor. And of the roughly 1,400 people on board, a massive chunk, about 780 of them, were prisoners.
And this is where it gets incredibly absurd. When you compare these historical convictions to modern equivalents, we aren't just talking about hardened, dangerous criminals. Many were convicted for things that would barely warrant a minor fine today. Stealing bread. Stealing a handkerchief. One guy was literally transported across the globe for stealing 12 cucumber plants. Modern Australia genuinely began not as some grand colonial mission, but as a remarkably expensive way for Britain to banish petty thieves they just didn't want to feed anymore.
Now, let's jump forward in time a bit to 1932. Australia had just come out of a world war and gone straight into an economic depression. And farmers out in Western Australia faced a massive new enemy. 20,000. That staggering number represents a massive horde of emus that were migrating right through farmland, trampling precious wheat crops, and wrecking fences during one of the toughest economic periods in history.
So the government did something totally unprecedented. They sent in the actual military. On one side, you have the Australian military armed with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition going up against birds. This was, officially, a real military operation. But, spoiler alert, it did not go well. Emus, it turns out, can run over 50 kilometers an hour, they scatter unpredictably, and incredibly, they apparently just shrug off machine gun fire the way most animals shrug off rain.
After a few ridiculous weeks, the operation was quietly called off. Despite using thousands of rounds of military ammunition, fewer than 1,000 emus had actually been killed. The newspapers at the time absolutely didn't hold back, leading to a hilarious conclusion: the emus, by most tellings, had won. To this day, the Great Emu War is a real piece of history cementing the time Australia officially lost the war to a bird.
Let's pivot for a second to the wildlife itself. We all know Australia has a reputation for a landscape that constantly tries to kill you. It's got more venomous creatures than any other continent. But the strangest survival story doesn't come from a deadly spider or a snake. It comes from an ant, specifically the bulldog ant. Researchers studying 1950s and 60s nuclear test sites were absolutely stunned to find these ants casually moving through areas that had just been heavily irradiated, surviving radiation levels that would kill almost any other complex organism on Earth. To this day, nobody fully understands how they pull it off.
And then there's the other side of Australia's bizarre ecosystem dynamics. 24. Just look at that tiny number. In 1859, a single settler released exactly 24 rabbits onto his property. Why? Well, simply because he liked hunting them and wanted to feel a bit more at home.
Within decades, those 24 rabbits had multiplied into hundreds of millions, becoming one of the fastest-spreading mammal invasions ever documented anywhere on the planet. The response was completely desperate. Australia eventually built a massive, 3,000-kilometer-long rabbit-proof fence just trying to stop them from spreading further. The result? The rabbits simply went around it. It's a pretty stark reminder of just how fragile and uncontrollable natural ecosystems really are when humans intervene.
But, you know, not everything about Australian history is just strange trivia about birds, ants, or rabbits. Some of it is genuinely dark. And as an explainer of history, it really deserves to be looked at plainly and with respect. From roughly 1910 to 1970, the continent was shaped by a deeply tragic era known as the Stolen Generations. This was a time defined by a dark, official government policy targeting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children based purely on their race.
The reality of this policy is honestly heartbreaking. It allowed for the forced removal of children from their families. These kids were placed with white families or put into institutions. Many were falsely told that their parents had either died or abandoned them when neither was true. And the absolute most crucial point to understand here is that this wasn't some fringe rumor or a tragic accident. This was a highly organized, official government-run operation that lasted for 6 decades. The scars from those 6 decades run incredibly deep, and it took an agonizingly long time for the government to take accountability. It wasn't until the year 2008, just over a decade and a half ago, that an Australian Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, finally stood up in Parliament. He formally apologized to the Aboriginal people on behalf of the nation, on camera, for the entire country to hear, acknowledging the profound grief, suffering, and loss caused by these intentional policies.
Now, what's truly profound is the incredible contrast we're left with here. 65,000 years of continuous culture versus 200 years of destructive policy. Just think about the sheer resilience required here. This ancient culture survived an ice age, they survived total geographic isolation, and they survived a landscape that actively tries to kill you every single day. But what they almost didn't survive was 2 centuries of intentional erasure and colonial policy. And yet, they are still here.
To put this whole story into a stunning global perspective, the oldest continuously practiced culture on Earth still exists on that continent today. It's older than the pyramids of Giza, it is older than Stonehenge, it's even older than the very concept of written language anywhere in the entire world. It's just a breathtaking legacy of survival and adaptation.
Australia is a place of incredible extremes. It's a place where the government once lost a military war to birds, where an ant shrugs off nuclear blasts, and where 24 rabbits became a national catastrophe. But ultimately, it all comes back to how this entire bizarre, tragic, and remarkably resilient modern history was sparked by a single piece of legal paper that declared the land empty. The land wasn't empty. It never was. It just took the rest of the world a very long time to admit it. So considering all of this, what other hidden histories are out there, just waiting for us to finally pay attention?